الله بالخير. تعرضت كل من جنوب أفريقيا وفلسطين لغزو استعماري غربي شرس نتج منه نظامان عنصريان قام على بناء سياسي إيديولوجي يزعم التحضر والتفوق ويؤسس للفصل العنصري بين الغزاة والسكان الأصليين أهل الأرض. يتوسع المؤرخ إيلان بابيه في كتابه إسرائيل وجنوب أفريقيا الأوجه المتعددة للفصل العنصري في المقارنة بين الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لفلسطين ونظام الفصل العنصري الأبرتايد في جنوب أفريقيا. كيف صادرت جماعات الضغط الإسرائيلية إرث نيلسون مانديلا؟ ما هو شكل المقاومة التي دافع عنها المديبة؟ هل يشبه الأبرتايد الإسرائيلي الأبرتايد في جنوب أفريقيا أم هو أسوأ منه؟ سقوط نظام الفصل العنصري في جنوب أفريقيا يؤسس لنهاية الأبرتايد الإسرائيلي، لكن متى تتحرر فلسطين؟ نرحب بكم ونرى ونسمع أكثر من ضيفنا النائب في برلمان جنوب أفريقيا ماندلا في البعد الأقرب. هذه الميادين وأنا زينب صفار، خليكم ويانا. Mandela, Member of Parliament for the African National Congress, Emir of the Royal House of Mandela, grandson of Nelson Mandela, Tribal Chief of the Mvezo Traditional Council. Your Excellency Mandla Mandela, salam and welcome to Al Mayadeen. This is the proximate aspect. I'm Zainab Al Safar. Pure pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be here on Al Mayadeen for the interview. Thank you for the invitation.
Great to have you always, sir. Well, Nelson Mandela, shortly after his release from prison, wrote, quote, "South Africa will never forget the support of Israel to the apartheid regime." Might you elaborate, sir, on how Israel supported the apartheid regime in your country?
The apartheid regime of South Africa was in alliance with the Israeli apartheid regime, together with the various administrations in the United States of America. From the dawn of the National Party as victory in 1948 and its subsequent unjust laws of the apartheid era, it was through the support of the United States of America with the United Kingdom that they were boldened to entrench white supremacy in South Africa, and in thus leading to a relationship between apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa being rekindled, and ensuring that they learned from one another and mastered the art of oppression. And therefore, us as South Africans, we can never forget that relationship that apartheid Israel had with apartheid South Africa.
And yes, it is useless and futile also for us to continue talking peace and nonviolence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks. That was the exact verbatim of the Madiba back in the 1961. Yet Israel's lobbyists, both in South Africa and around the world, have painted President Mandela as a liberal pacifist who kindly made peace with his enemies while his life was dedicated to resisting oppression and restoring dignity. Tell us more, please.
We must categorically state this, that Mandela became a man of peace once he had defeated the apartheid regime. In his entire life, he waged a struggle for liberation, leading our people together with many other revolutionaries, ordinary men and women in South Africa, who were fighting the unjust laws and the white supremacist ideology of apartheid. And therefore, in doing so, he waged the struggle in many fronts, internally within our borders, externally reaching out to the frontline states and the African continent to rally behind our support, but also reaching out to the anti-apartheid movement and the Free Mandela campaign that was embraced by the global community, not only for him, but for many political prisoners in South Africa. And therefore, in doing so, he had to understand that to have an effective struggle for liberation, it had to be waged in many fronts. And it was in this regard that he proposed adopting an armed struggle and therefore giving birth to Mkhonto weSizwe, which Madiba became its first commander-in-chief, going into Algeria for military training with Robert Risher in 1962. In this regard, he believed that we cannot sit idle against a brutal, oppressive regime in South Africa, and we had also to be able to defend our people and defend our dignity, and therefore was able to wage an effective armed struggle against the apartheid regime. We were very happy to be assisted by countries like Palestine, Libya. Cuba played an instrumental role in our armed struggle. In the Battle of Quitoguana Valley in Angola, it was the Cubans that sent soldiers to turn the tide around, and we were able to defeat the South African regime outside South African borders, and it was then that it started retreating.
Your Excellency, why did Israel lobbyists attempt on purpose to snatch and steal Mandela's legacy and try to shape him as only a reconciler and a pacifist and not a person who was always there to face the oppression of this apartheid regime?
This is what has always been portrayed internationally, Mandela, the man of peace. So that even revolutionaries right throughout the world, oppressed nations, must be able to turn the other cheek and be able to resort to peaceful means, without the realization that in any struggle there must be a waged for a means of attaining your freedom. For example, in Madiba's stance, for him to embrace peace and come to the table for talks before negotiations, he called for three things, which were the immediate release of political prisoners, because he believed prisoners could not negotiate, only free men could negotiate. And then he called for all political parties to be unbanned in South Africa, enabling them to be able to effectively participate in the transition to democracy and be involved in the negotiations. But thirdly, he called for the right of return of all South Africans living in exile, so they too can be able to participate in our transition. It was only when these three things were met by the apartheid regime of South Africa that Madiba was able to embrace peace and be able to call for the armed struggle to be disbanded.
Right. Mr. Mandela, today we commemorate 75 years to the Nakba. Palestinians of all ages are still fighting back, even with their bare flesh and blood, and people of the free world in all nations across all the continents are standing in solidarity and support with the Palestinians. What are the commonalities between the Palestinian liberation struggle and black liberation movements in South Africa, please?
We come from the same struggle. I mean, Madiba used to always tell us that during our darkest days of the struggle for liberation, it was the heroic and brave Palestinians that inspired us and gave us hope that we too would be able to realize freedom in our lifetime. But if you witness what has happened since the occupations, in South Africa, we were forced as the indigenous people of South Africa into a land, less than 13% of the land was allocated for 87% of the population being the black majority. And 87% of the land was taken for 10% white supremacists. Which formed the 10% of the population. And this is exactly what has happened in occupied Palestine. The Palestinian borders that we have come to be accustomed to and know have been eroded to even less than 12% today. So the Bantustans that we rejected as South Africans is what is forced to the Palestinians today. Classic example, if you look at the West Bank today, it reminds us as South Africans of a Bantustan called the Ciskai. And if you look at Gaza today, it would remind us of the Bantustan that I came from, being the Transkei. And Gaza is the largest open-air prison that you see today. But the forceful eviction that we witnessed in South Africa in the 50s during the areas of Sophia Town and District 6, it is what has been continuing unabated in occupied Palestine. You see illegal evictions in Silwan, in South Hebron, in Jerusalem, where Palestinian homes are raided and are demolished, and they are illegally removed, neglecting international law. These are the experiences that we had to witness as South Africans.
True. To stay in South Africa, it has been nearly 3 decades since South Africa became a democracy, and many wonder, what have you done in the years of freedom after the momentous election of 1994? What sort of freedom have the people of South Africa gained since 1994, and what other freedoms are they still fighting for, yearning for?
Well, we have been able to defeat the apartheid regime and rid ourselves of apartheid legislatively. But economically, the legacy of apartheid is still glaring. There has been achievement in the sense that 34% of South Africans in the past used to have access to electricity. Today, you have 96% of the population in South Africa having access to electricity. You have also again a minority of the population that had access to clean drinkable water in South Africa. Today we have been able to access just about 94% of South Africa's population has got access to clean drinkable water. You used to have no housing that was put in place by the apartheid regime in the period of 1960 to 1990. But since the dawn of democracy in 1994, we've built over 12 million houses right across the landscape of our country for the most poor and the most vulnerable in society. These are the milestones we've been able to achieve, but the reality is still there that economically we have still not turned the tide. The land that we fought for is still held by the minority, and that being white supremacists.
In a similar sense, Sir, Archbishop Desmond Tutu expressed this view, asking, what is black empowerment when it seems to benefit not the vast majority, but an elite that tends to be recycled? So as a person who represents the people, what are your remarks addressing the economic situation in South Africa today?
Well, we have continuously looked at various policies to ensure that we can broaden that and reach as wider percentage of our population. So today, instead of speaking about black economic empowerment, we have extended that to be a broad black economic empowerment, so that even the most rural of communities can be brought into participating in the economy.
Sure. Now, the African Union's condemnation of Israel's colonialist and discriminatory practices against Palestine, its suspension of Israel's observer status, and its request that its 55 member states cut scientific and cultural ties with Israel have drawn vocal support from the academic community in North Africa, which also, alongside South Africa, protested in 2021 loudly when Israel received observer status at the Pan-African body. Netanyahu has ardently promised himself a strong foothold in Africa, which is proven to be an utter fiasco, of course. What happened, Your Excellency?
Well, for us as Africans, we can relate to what the Palestinians are experiencing. We come as South Africa from 350 years of colonialism, coupled with 60 years of a brutal apartheid regime. And all of us share the similar and same common struggles. And this is why for us it is easy to relate with what the Palestinians are experiencing. We were all utterly shocked with the unilateral decision that was taken by the AU chairperson to render apartheid Israel an observer status. And this is why South Africa, as well as Algeria, with the assistance of Kenya, we were able to rise to the occasion and mobilize African countries to say that you too came from this brutal past. We cannot allow this to happen under our own institution.
Yes.
And this is why we therefore came to reversing that. And since then, we as African states have had to be awake to the Zionist lobby on the African continent. Last year in March, we met in Dakar in Senegal, mobilizing 21 African countries that rallied behind the Palestinian struggle. And we pledged our support to doing everything possible in supporting the Palestinians. We even have a slogan that goes as far as saying that if the Arab nations and the Arab League of Nations turns its back on our brothers and sisters in Palestine, Africa will liberate Palestine.
Bless you. Your Excellency, Mr. Mandela, recently Israel carried out a series of targeted, bloody and heinous bombings in besieged Gaza. Is the Secretary General, by any sense, playing his role in the case of Palestine?
We have always held the position Madiba held that the Palestinian struggle is the greatest moral issue of our time, and yet the world sits by in silence. We are seeing a world that is very complicit. They are quick to take sanctions in other areas and in other parts of the world. But when it comes to the Palestinian struggle, everyone wants to turn a blind eye. And we have embarked on a program of action and calling on the global community to rise and speak out, just as they were able to do with ours in the anti-apartheid movement. We are calling on that anti-apartheid movement of the 70s and the 80s to rise to the occasion and rally behind the Palestinian cause. Right. It is through civil society that we can be able to mobilize enough masses on the ground to be vocal and speak out against the atrocities that are meted out daily towards the Palestinians. And what we have witnessed in Gaza is an ongoing, unabated Nakba. Since 1948, Palestinians have been experiencing this catastrophe, and Netanyahu and his administration have never been held accountable. We call on the ICC to issue out a warrant of arrest for Netanyahu and his entire administration. They have to be held accountable for ethnic cleansing and the genocide that they are carrying out.
Now, apparently South Africa is known globally for having one of the most stringent processes when selling arms to countries. This is according to experts and observers. The United States ambassador to Pretoria has accused South Africa of providing military support to Russia, despite its declared neutrality in the conflict with Ukraine. Is the US of A today pressuring South Africa to change its neutral position vis-à-vis its proxy war in Ukraine?
Well, we have a long relationship with the likes of Cuba, Libya, Palestine, Russia, and even China. And we have continuously held to these relationships, even post-apartheid era. We continue to have joint military exercises with Russia in terms of upskilling our own military. And of recent times, we have had a joint military exercise on our shores in South Africa with Russia. We have not been participating in international wars, particularly that of Russia and Ukraine. Although we believe that there should be a ceasefire and negotiations held, but we are very much alive that the likes of the United States of America as well as NATO are being hypocrites when it comes to this Russia and Ukraine clashes we've been seeing. And we have always held the principal ground that what we can do as international community is to call on these two countries to come around the table and have a peaceful negotiations. We know very well that the United States of America and NATO have been providing arms for Ukraine and have been fueling those clashes.
Very true. Truly, as the Madiba once said, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Yes, all of us need to do more in supporting the struggle of the people of Palestine for self-determination. South African MP, political leader and statesman Mandela, thank you very much, sir. Such a pleasure to have you always.
Thank you. It's been an honor and great to be with you this afternoon.
Actually, it's our honor, sir. هنري كيسنجر ثعلب السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية بلغ 100 عام في أيار مايو المنصرم. أسهمت تدخلاته في جميع أنحاء العالم خلال السبعينيات في تشكيل الأحداث في الصين وأفريقيا والشرق الأوسط مع عواقب مشينة يتردد صداها إلى اليوم. فيما يتعلق بجنوب أفريقيا، كان كيسنجر أول وزير خارجية أمريكي يزور البلاد آنذاك، ما أعطى قوة دفع ومكانة لنظام الفصل العنصري في أعقاب مذبحة سويتو عام 1976 عندما قتلت الشرطة العشرات من طلاب المدارس المتظاهرين وآخرين. لكن كيسنجر فشل في فهم أن النضال من أجل العدالة كان قد بدأ يغير العالم والدبلوماسية نفسها. أدت الدبلوماسية الأمريكية الدنيئة في أفريقيا إلى إطالة أمد الفصل العنصري، ولعل هذه الدبلوماسية نفسها دبلوماسية الرجل الأبيض تطيل نظام الفصل العنصري البائس في فلسطين المحتلة. بعد 75 عاما على النكبة، لا يزال الفلسطينيون من جميع الأعمار والأطياف رجالا ونساء يقاومون المحتل، ويقف الأحرار والمقاومون في جميع دول العالم متضامنين معهم. لعل المستعمر يفهم أخيرا أن خططه فاشلة، وأن نبض الشعب الجنوب أفريقي وكذا الشعب الفلسطيني ومقاومتهما بكل أشكالها أسقطت وتسقط أنظمة بالية عنصرية وهمية وحتما إلى زوال. من كل الميادين سلاما وتحية، في مان لا.